keeping in mind that this is for other communities that might be under the threat of a similar thing to the ACP. And for background, can you tell us what the Rockfish Valley Foundation is and why the ACP affected it?
The Rockfish Valley Foundation, founded in 2005, has a mission basically to make our population environmentally literate so that we can become better stewards of our environment, pure and simple. To get there, you're talking about a lot of education, but you got to have a reason to get into our study. And sorry, let me get rid of that. Unfortunately, we live in a beautiful area. It's all scenic. All the roads are scenic byways. People don't have the opportunity to get access to the kind of land that the foundation has in its facilities. And they don't have opportunity to get access to the waterways. So we had resources in the valley to attract people. And it's a long, long story how facilities got developed, but they were developed basically to get people out of doors so kids could eat more dirt. I love saying that, but it's true. When we were in our pre-elementary age, we got to eat a lot of dirt, and a lot of times our parents didn't even know where we were. You know, think about that. Today it's a lot different, and so we have a purpose. We have those facilities. We're trying to build the education quotient, and now with all the technology, a lot of people said, don't push the technologies outdoors. You want to get people out just to breathe and run and do all of this. And that isn't the way this next generation is going to operate. They're going to operate with the technologies. And so now, all of a sudden, our vision has been supported by new technologies. We've got things, and I recommend to everybody now, an app called Picture This. It's one of the best apps you can get for identifying plants and shrubs and trees, and it's an education tool. And so we're going to use that at our center to send out with the kids into the little park on little devices for them to, with their parents, discover. And because they like technologies, the same thing, we're bringing Wi-Fi to the park. It's pretty well there. We got Greg Truslow taking it from a 90% position to 100% with some gadgets that he recommends. Firefly has made a difference in the Rockfish Valley, and I think is and will in Nelson County. And how many other counties do they serve? You know, half a dozen maybe. So if we get serious about moving broadband around all the communities and not being afraid of it, I think we can do a lot more towards environmental literacy and creating stewardship. So that's why we're there. Very simply, where else would you like to take your dog for a walk? Please pick up the poop, but where else can you take your dog for a walk every day? Where can you take your grandchildren to a children's park? These are things that we've done since 2005 that have just sort of come naturally more than out of a book. And I know we were lucky to become an affiliate of the Virginia Museum of Natural History. We're going to be even more fortunate when their $20 million facility gets constructed in Waynesboro along the South River. And then we become a triumvirate with the museum in Martinsville and us and there in Waynesboro to link people to even better presentations of the environment.
So the ACP would have affected you how?
The ACP drew up its plan and then amended its plan. And both plans had it coming directly through us, through historic resources, through registered landmarks, through floodplains, through scenic historic districts. So it was making a tremendous impact, and I'm here to tell you that there were a lot of focus on defending against the pipeline, but I think the Rockfish Valley Foundation has never wanted to claim the major impact it had on it. But I'm here to tell you that we did.
So part of the National Historic Preservation Act, as it applies to gas pipelines, is this section 106. And I know that you want to talk about that because it has to do with impact on historic resources.
Well, gee, Woody, I just happened to bring a 16-page document, and the good news is, I'll tell you the title of it, and that's it. What I would want to impart to whomever watches this video is get to know your place. Don't wait to read about a big, impactful complex coming through, such as a pipeline or a utility easement or whatever. Don't wait. Get to know your place and understand the resources in the Commonwealth. I can't predict the future, but we've been fortunate to have agencies, Secretary of Natural Resources. They're not necessarily going to open their door for us, but they've got lots of staff. They've got lots of online work. COVID has made a lot of restrictions, but I'm here to say, even with the change in the leadership of the Commonwealth, that the Virginia Department of Historic Resources is a critical place. The Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation, and the other acronym places, the DWR, the DGIF, the DEQ, all of those things are important places. So don't wait till you read about a project. Learn about your place. Historic Resources has just that, resources. There's been a lot of study of every county in the state. And DHR knows about a lot of your historic resources, but they don't know all of it. In Nelson, we were able, and the Nelson County Historical Society was able to present to DHR historic resources that they did not have registered in their maps. And we got them added to their maps. Also, look at your place and see if it does have a history of culture and early settlements and cemeteries and buildings and what have you, and find some leadership or become your leadership to consider things like a historic district. You will get so much help from so many people to get it from A to Z that it might sound like a big challenge, but frankly, you owe it to your descendants, you owe it to your children and their children to look at your culture and your history and your environmental resources and get them identified. Once you get them identified, you'll get some help from these state agencies as to whether or not you qualify for setting up a historic district. And we did that. We started in 2009. It was not an easy process. We didn't finish until 2016. That's when we actually got approval of the historic district from the federal government, the U.S. Department of Interior. So with all of that said, the federal government has this 106 process, and they issued guidelines for historic properties management plans. And here's a 16-pager. I've had it printed off of the computer for a long time. It's really interesting. The guy who's chairman of the advisory council is John Now, and anybody who knows anything about the Civil War or history in Virginia should know about John Now. He's he's important enough that he's created lots of, well, he's given away tens of $1 millions to make sure historic resources got in the, at least in the index of all the important places. But there are people like John Now, actually lives in Texas. There are people like John Now who have made sure that we do have a foundation on which we can build to understand our community and to protect our community when the time comes. I would say that having a community with a comprehensive plan, you as a citizen should really push that. You should really get involved in your governance, and you should make sure that things like historic resources and protection thereof come into some of the ordinances that your supervisors or councilmen can undertake. So if you don't get into the trenches, you'll find the bulldozers filling in those trenches with some weird project that you could have defended yourself against just if you'd known about your place and gotten it organized.
So part of this is that if a pipeline is built and there is documentation of its impact on historic resources, they have to either avoid or mitigate.
And it all starts with who has a seat at the table. FERC builds the table. They're required by federal law to bring in the State Department of Historic Resources to complete a task. And the task is to evaluate if any resources are going to be affected. And that's where you come back to knowing what your resources are and having them get listed so that you've got your weapon, so to speak, in your arsenal. And you don't have to go and fail in putting together something that you have. So they have that job, and they have an excellent staff. I cannot say enough about the leadership in our Department of Historic Resources and the people that I've worked with on getting historic districts, getting properties recognized, and doing the 106. So FERC then says, you've got Dominion, for example, you've got to check some boxes before you can begin your project. One of them that you must check is the 106 process. And the state is the one, Roger Kirchen at Virginia, Roger convened some parties. Well, who are those parties going to be? And that's where it's really difficult. The feds don't like naming consultants to a project. They don't like having people sit around a table. They want it all done through e-library uploads of documents. They don't want people communicating and making it clear where it stands. Now, I have to disagree with that. I think consultants should be encouraged, and that's up to the citizens to see that that can be done in the future. But right now, it's pretty well limited. But you always have a representative of your local government. Nelson, Board of Supervisors, Ernie Reed. Before him, this took a number of years, Connie Brennan. We had leadership at that level. The Historical Society was given a seat at the table, not a vote. The Rockfish Valley Foundation was given a seat at the table. Again, not a vote. No documents required our signature. The deal had to be struck between the state, FERC, and the developer, Dominion. And to be really clear about that, FERC is having to worry about some issues today about easements, and perhaps the courts and the law will make that more understandable for future projects. But there's certainly a lot of questions today. One of those questions is, if you're required to have a mitigation treatment plan by the 106 process, and that plan is agreed on by the state, FERC, and say Dominion, with the input of people like the Nelson County Historical Society and the Rockfish Valley Foundation. If that's agreed upon, the project can go forward. But we are in a mystery place today, and so I suggest to anybody, get this cleared up so you don't have the same problem that the ACP people are having at the moment, trying to understand what happens to easements, what happens to money that was agreed upon or actually paid out, what happens to a mitigation treatment plan that was written and signed. Because that mitigation treatment plan was required before Dominion could start doing anything. And it started and it did a lot of things. Nothing in the existing treatment plan said it would be eliminated if the project was eliminated. Nothing in that plan said that if Dominion changed the route and didn't go through a waterway that the Army Corps of Engineers later says you can't use, or that the courts say you can't use, if that's done and you have to relocate the route, nothing in that plan said that plan went away. Now, you got to know who draws up these documents, because normally the document is construed against the person who drew it. So if you're a citizen in a county and suddenly you're pulled into one of these project processes, you don't have much of a chance to draw the laws. You don't have a chance to draw the documents. And all you can do is to argue your case and get your community behind you. But the paper that you get is pretty well what other people want you to have. But if you get into a problem, it should be construed against you. And therefore, Nelson and the people in Nelson, and even these mitigation treatment plans, are in a mystery point right now. Because sad to say that some of the documents used in the ACP could have used some better construction. They could have been written more clearly. They could have covered issues about what happened if a project went away, or if a route got moved, or things like that. But it wasn't. So we don't know today. You might say that Nelson County, with the ACP, we're sort of on a threshold of how are these things going to be dealt with.
Looking at the South Rockfish Valley particularly, and the area of it that is impacted by the route, or was going to be impacted by the route, were there specific historic places, resources there that you were pointing to as being harmed?
We were fortunate in that we had done a historic district, and archaeology sites have a different presence than a historic farm or historic structures. Archaeology is a little different. It's identified, but it's not one of the pushes for the district. It's archaeology, it's not historic properties. And we did have all of that. We had many registered properties, some that the easement would go right through, and some that was in a view shed. But the archaeology site itself was cut through in two places on the plans. And then Dominion, it was such a big project, Dominion made mistakes that they weren't even aware of until landowners pointed them out to them. And that's going to happen in any project that's a couple of hundred or 2,000 miles, whatever the length of the thing is going to be. It's just too big for everybody to have every tree in dissection. And we learned that somebody in Dominion said, you've got to find another route because the law says find another route. The guy who drew the route for Dominion, I got to know him, he's a very nice man, did an excellent job for what he was told to do. But he drew it through a conservation easement. He didn't even know that a place like the Virginia Outdoors Foundation had conservation easements that he was going through. He did not even know that he was going through a historic farm, registered not for the house and the outbuildings, but for the farm. 250 years of agriculture. This exists all over the state of Virginia. Look and understand as best you can your options for putting on easements through people like the Virginia Outdoors Foundation or other holders of easements. Look at registering a historic place that's not going to say your door has to be brown and not green. They don't control you that way. It's not a penalty, it's a protection. And this man, unfortunately, didn't have the resources to find all those. He was terribly embarrassed when he found out what he had done, and he apologized. But remember, you as a citizen don't have a say if the developer makes a mistake. If they draw a route that comes through all these things and they submit it to FERC, you can't get rid of it. They would have liked to have taken this option off the table. There was no way in the law to take it off the table. So you got another situation where if we're going to continue having this sort of project and decision making, we got to have a better toolkit, and they have to have a better toolkit. So,
yeah. Ron, have you did anything occur to you?
I'm interested in writing a pamphlet for people that receive a letter like we did. Just out of the blue, the letter says, you know, we're a pipeline, we have eminent domain, we're coming through your property, and signed here. Give us permission to survey. And so this book is written for people that receive these letters in the future in some other community. And suppose a friend called you up and said, I know you all fight this pipeline, and I just got this letter, they're going to put one through my property, and you won. What should I do? What would you tell them?
if you're doing a booklet, I would put some resources, and then I would make sure that the resources were of value. You can't get it all in a one-pager. Bullets are better than a bunch of words. Pictures are better than all of that. And the picture is the experience that came out of this project. It probably ought to have a book written instead of a pamphlet. But from a pamphlet standpoint, it almost brings a smile to your face. There were people who let Dominion come through, and they offered them X dollars, and they took it. Their neighbors waited a little bit, but also dealt with Dominion, and they got Y dollars, and quite frequently there were zeros to the later guy. And so one thing is get advice, because you don't have the knowledge to commit to anything until you understand it, and don't expect that you have the time or the experience to get there. So resources, seeking advice, maybe it's wise enough to have a pro bono element in some nonprofit that people can know is aware of a new project, and that new project has had some vetting very quickly, so that there is maybe even a website. You know, everybody's into technologies now, so maybe there's a place to go and maybe there's a series of questions, maybe there's a series of concerns, maybe there's some quotes, but it's got to be a document that somebody will read